There is a huge problem with the way that bread is designed. This is the ingredients list for your average loaf of bread. Flour for structure, water that hydrates the flour, yeast that makes the bread rise, and salt that controls the activity of that yeast. This is bread, and it's really never changed. Unless you live in the United States.
Bread today is not what it was a few decades ago.
If you're buying store-bought bread, none of it's going to be that good for you.
It's not supposed to be food or even eaten for that matter, and it's definitely not fresh.
The food corporations, the greedy food corporations, have a lot to answer for.
Our bread is fucked. And our bread is so fucked.
This is the ingredients list of one of the most popular bread brands in America. Wonder Bread. A shocking 31 individual ingredients. Far from that 4-ingredient formula that has been used for thousands of years. This wasn't a mistake. It was an intentional redesign of one of the most basic foods in all of human history. And it's not just Wonder Bread though. It's everyone. A typical 4-ingredient bread is pretty hard to come by in America. Most stores just won't carry them. The original recipe is nowhere to be found. So why? For something so ancient, so delicious, something that has been ingrained in the fiber of our society for so long, why are we faking it? Before all the cool technology we have today, your average loaf back then was notably a lot darker, denser, and very grainy. It was also pretty tacky. The bread seemed perfectly fine though. Most people didn't have any complaints with it. But it did have two fatal flaws that would eventually get it killed off in the eyes of most of society. The first problem was shelf life. This is what happens to dark, grainy bread that follows that normal 4-ingredient formula in about a day or two. It rots. Bakers had to bake it fresh pretty much every single day and couldn't afford to make more than they could sell in that day. The second problem wouldn't reveal itself until later, but this would be the one that really sucked for avid dark bread consumers. By the late 1800s, industrial milling technology made it extremely easy to produce massive amounts of white flour at scale. Now, white bread had existed before, but it was very intensive to make this white flour by hand, so it was pretty much only reserved for the wealthy. With the invention of the steel roller mill in the mid-1800s, it became pretty affordable to the middle class, and people absolutely loved it. They were kind of just hypnotized by the fact that it looked nice and it was soft, and that's what mattered more than anything else.
This stuff is a great pillow.
At the same time, dark bread started to carry a different reputation. This kind of bread, mainly pumpernickel and rye, was mostly cooked in shops run by German immigrants at the time. Which, according to the public, these shops were unsanitary and they left their loaves exposed to dust and grime for way too long. Now, this wasn't confirmably true, but whether or not it was, didn't actually matter. I'm gonna go out on a limb and say anti-immigrant sentiment at the time probably had a little bit to do with this as well. The public's perception was already set, you could say. Dark bread was unsanitary, and it was deemed something that only poorer people would eat. Kids got bullied at the lunch table in middle school for eating darker bread. Probably. Now, funnily enough at the time, doctors were also reinforcing this idea that white bread was the staple of health. Most medical professionals claimed it was easily digestible, provided the quick energy you needed, and didn't irritate sensitive stomachs. They often recommended it to hospital patients for this reason. Don't eat dark bread, they said. It's too hard on the system. I don't know if that would pass as medical advice nowadays.
Many surgeons weren't totally sure what even caused infections, so to treat some of them, they'd often just cut off a person's limbs.
You what?
But ironically, there was this trade-off that nobody really understood at the time. White bread mills, as one man put it, were scalping the life out of the wheat grain. Man kept for himself wheat's whiteness, its starch, its calories, and fed the husks, the germ, the life, to swine. It was true, the process of whitening wheat involves removing two parts, the bran and the germ. The bran is the fiber, and removing it makes the bread softer. The germ is the oil that contains a lot of the good nutrients. Removing it helped prevent the bread from becoming rancid. The nutritious parts, the stuff your body actually needs to function, were indeed fed to livestock. But for decades, no one really noticed this. White bread was winning with doctors because it was chewy, I guess. It was also cheap and convenient, especially when they started pre-slicing it. Therefore, it became the default. The companies that capitalized on this became very rich and powerful because bread was a whole quarter of the average American's diet. But they all had the same thing in common. Their bread was barely food. World War II was the first thing to expose the truth on this. Men aged 21 to 45 had to register for the draft, and massive numbers of them showed up for military service with severe nutritional deficiencies. Pellagra, beriberi, stunted growth, weakened immune systems. Something in the American diet was fundamentally broken. Can you guess what it was? Well, one of the most consumed foods in the entire country was the first place to look. Turns out stripping bread of all of its nutrients and feeding it to a bunch of cows was not the best way to build a healthy population. The real solution came in the form of a process that bread companies like to call enrichment. See that bread that's been stripped of all its vitamins and minerals? Well, let's get the vitamins and minerals back and then re-add it to the bread. Genius, and a simple way to fix our problem. That's why most of the bread you see in the store now has the enriched wheat flour. The word enriched itself was also strategic. It was chosen very deliberately over the word restored, because restored would have drawn attention to the fact that these nutrients were there in the first place, that they were just adding them back, that they were solving a problem they created themselves. Enriched sounds like an upgrade, so they went with it. Like each of these companies were going above and beyond and adding extra value to the bread. It was genius marketing and also a government mandate because we needed healthy soldiers. A lot of historians actually credit it with helping the US win the war. Bread was actually so crucial that the army established entire baking schools to get bread to the soldiers. And of course, it was very crucial to the general population as well. In January of 1943, the US government briefly banned the sale of pre-sliced bread as a wartime conservation effort. They needed to save wax paper for wrapping military supplies and steel for munitions instead of slicing machines. The public backlash was so intense that they rescinded the ban only 2 months later. Sliced, processed, shelf-stable bread had this insane grip on American culture. And the war effort gave it something even more valuable than popularity. It gave it legitimacy. But it also gave bread companies something else. An incentive to keep optimizing their product. Taking the bran and the germ out was a good first step, but that only increased the shelf life for a few days. Bread companies needed something more. So after the war, preservatives started showing up in bread recipes, and these massively increased shelf life, sometimes up to 2 weeks. Suddenly, bread factories could pump out massive quantities and ship them anywhere in the country without worrying about spoilage. Distribution became easy, and scaling became inevitable. By the 1950s, this formula was complete. Enriched white flour, water, yeast, salt, preservatives.
But wait, there's more.
Also bread conditioners to make it soft, kind of like the conditioner you put in your hair. Emulsifiers are used to prevent the bread from drying out quickly. Vegetable oils to improve texture and extend shelf life even further. Sugar to enhance softness and coincidentally make it more addictive. It wasn't anything like the old Coca-Cola addictive, but it worked pretty well for their case. Anyways, with the addition of this sugar, the ingredients list is done. Each ingredient solved a problem with the bread or enhanced a marketable quality about it. Once the formula was locked in, it was time to scale. And scale they did. By the 1970s and 80s, white bread accounted for around 3/4 of all bread sold in the United States. Wonder Bread alone was selling nearly 1 billion loaves per year. To put that into perspective, the US population in 1980 was around 226 million people. A single loaf of Wonder Bread contains roughly 24 slices. That is 96 slices per person per year of just one brand of bread. You know, the perfect consistent food that certainly didn't expire tomorrow. It would have been nearly impossible to build an empire this large with bread that expires in a couple of days, because traditional bread doesn't scale. It doesn't travel, and it doesn't sit on shelves very well. Fake bread does all three. This is why it became the foundation of a multi-billion-dollar industry. This stuff tastes like cake too. Basically, all these forces combine to make the bread we see on shelves today. Darker bread being viewed as inferior, the need for a longer lasting bread, the war, the expectation of perfect, square, pre-sliced loaves that are convenient for toast and sandwiches and pillows. That's why traditional bread in America is so hard to find. But despite the lack of a true bakery culture, the bread on American shelves has changed a bit since the 1950s. Take one of the more popular brands like Dave's Killer Bread, for example. The ingredients list is longer than 4 items, sure, but it includes some good stuff and a more natural preservative than potassium bromate, which by the way is banned in most countries in Europe. It's no Roman Empire bread, but it's definitely a step in somewhat of a different direction. Other brands are following similar paths, trying to create something that is a little bit cleaner than your average white bread, but also is able to scale a business. They all do have the same thing in common though. They're all redesigns of the original masterpiece. Thanks for watching.